It was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons in late spring when the air felt soft and warm, like a blanket fresh out of the dryer. The kind of day where kids rode bikes with no helmets, neighbors watered their lawns in flip-flops, and the only real plan anyone had was to get through the weekend without too much trouble. In the quiet neighborhood of Oak Ridge, a place where sidewalks were swept clean, mailboxes matched the house trim, and everyone knew which family owned the golden retriever, most folks were enjoying the calm. Down the street, near the edge of the public park that doubled as a community garden, a 16-year-old boy walked slowly along the path. He wasn't in a hurry. His backpack hung loosely off one shoulder, and in his hand he held a sketchbook, its cover worn from use. Headphones sat snug over his ears, but the music was low, just enough to keep the world at a comfortable distance without blocking it out completely. He'd just come from the library downtown, where he'd spent the last 2 hours flipping through art books, copying brushstroke techniques into his notebook. Now he was heading home, taking the long way so he could pass by the sunflowers. He loved sunflowers, not in a poetic grand way, but in a quiet personal one. There was something honest about them. They stood tall, faced the sun, didn't ask for much. Every summer, someone in the neighborhood planted a row of them along the garden fence, and every year he'd stop to look, sometimes sketching their wide faces, their rough stems, the way their leaves caught the light. Today, 3 of them were in full bloom, golden and bold against the green. He stepped off the sidewalk just a little, onto the grassy edge near the fence, and tilted his head, studying the angle of a petal. He pulled out a pencil from his pocket and flipped open his sketchbook to a fresh page. He wasn't trespassing, he was still on public parkland, well within the walking path, but to someone watching from a distance, it might have looked like he was lingering where he didn't belong. Across the street, on a porch shaded by a wide awning, a woman sat in a wicker chair with a glass of iced tea. She'd lived in Oak Ridge for over 20 years. Her house was tidy, her hedges trimmed, her driveway freshly sealed last month. She knew most of the families on the block by name, waved at the mail carrier, and always brought cookies to the annual block party. But she didn't recognize this boy. She'd seen him around before, maybe at the bus stop or near the school, but never up close. And never alone like this, just standing near someone else's garden with his hands in his pockets. At first, she didn't think much of it. Kids wandered. Teens loitered. It was normal. But then he took a step closer to the fence. Then he pulled out that sketchbook. To her it looked odd. Why would someone sketch a garden? Was he mapping it? Taking notes? Her mind started filling in blanks she didn't realize were empty. She remembered a news story from last year about break-ins in a nearby town. Teenagers casing neighborhoods before striking. She told herself she wasn't jumping to conclusions. She was just being cautious, responsible. She set her glass down, went inside, and picked up her phone. Her fingers moved quickly. She dialed 911. "Hi, yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person," she said, voice low but urgent. "He's a black teenager, maybe 16 or 17, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. He's standing by the community garden on Elm and 5th, just watching the houses. He's got a notebook, maybe writing things down. I don't know if he's armed, but he looks like he doesn't belong here." The dispatcher asked for more details. She gave them. She didn't mention the sunflowers. She didn't say he looked calm or focused or like a kid lost in thought. She said, suspicious. She said, doesn't fit in. She said, better safe than sorry. Within 5 minutes, 2 police cruisers rolled up, lights off but sirens silent. The officers stepped out, both in uniform, belts heavy with gear. They approached the boy from either side, hands resting near their hips but not on their weapons. Still, the message was clear. You're being watched. "Hey," the taller officer said, voice firm but not shouting. "Can we see some ID?" The boy froze. The pencil slipped from his fingers and dropped into the grass. He slowly pulled one earbud out, blinking like he'd just woken up. "What? Oh, sure." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his nerves. He fumbled with his backpack, unzipping the front pocket with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy. He pulled out his school ID and held it out. The officer took it, glanced at the photo, then back at the boy's face. "What are you doing here?" "I was just looking at the sunflowers," he said, nodding toward the garden. "I like to draw them." The second officer glanced at the sketchbook, still open to a half-finished petal. You live around here? Yeah, about 10 blocks that way, he said, pointing east. I was walking home from the library. The officers exchanged a look. The call had said suspicious when I'm possibly casing the area. This kid looked nothing like that. But protocol was protocol. They couldn't just walk away. Mind if we hold on to this for a minute? The first officer asked, gesturing to the sketchbook. The boy hesitated. It's just drawings, he said quietly. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, the officer replied, softer now. But someone called us, so we gotta check it out. Just cooperate and we'll get you home quick. The boy nodded, but his shoulders tensed. He knew this dance. He'd seen videos. He'd heard stories from cousins, uncles, friends. He knew how fast just checking could turn into something else if you moved wrong or sounded angry, or even if you didn't answer fast enough. So he stood very still. He kept his hands visible. He didn't sigh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just waited, but inside frustration bubbled. He wasn't doing anything. He was just existing. And now he was being treated like a threat, because he stood near flowers while being black in a quiet neighborhood. After a few minutes of radio chatter and quiet discussion, the officers seemed satisfied he wasn't a danger, but they still wouldn't let him leave, not until they confirmed his story. One of them asked for his parents' number. The boy swallowed. He didn't want to call his mom. Not like this, not with cops standing over him like he'd done something shameful. But he also knew it was the fastest way out. Okay, he said, pulling out his phone. His fingers hovered over her contact. He took a breath and pressed call. It rang twice before she answered. Hey, baby. Everything all right? Her voice was warm, familiar, the kind that could calm a storm. But right now it made his throat tighten. Mom, I'm at the community garden on Elm. Near 5th? The police are here. Someone called them on me. There was a pause. Not long, just a heartbeat. But in that silence, he could hear her shift from mom mode to something sharper, more focused. Are you okay? Did they touch you? No, I'm fine. They said someone thought I looked suspicious. Another pause. Then calm but firm. Put one of them on the phone. He handed the phone to the taller officer who took it with a slight frown. Hello? There was a brief exchange, polite, professional, but with an undercurrent the boy couldn't hear. Then the officer's expression changed. His posture straightened. He glanced at his partner, then back at the boy, eyes wide with sudden realization. Yes, ma'am, he said quickly. Of course. We'll wait right here. He handed the phone back. Your mom's on her way, the boy blinked. She is? She said she'll be here in 10 minutes. From that moment, the atmosphere shifted. The officers didn't apologize, not yet, but their tone softened. They stepped back a little. Offered him a bottle of water from the cruiser, asked if he wanted to sit on the bench nearby. He declined but appreciated the gesture. Still, he couldn't relax. His heart was still pounding. And now he had to face his mother, not just as a kid who got in trouble, but as a kid who'd been treated like a criminal for standing near sunflowers. He looked across the street. The woman who'd called the police was still on her porch. She'd been watching the whole time, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Now, as the reality of what she'd done seemed to settle in, she turned and went inside, closing the screen door behind her with a soft click. The boy stared at the sunflowers again. They hadn't moved. They still faced the sun, golden and unbothered. He wished just for a second that he could be like them, rooted, steady, impossible to misread. 10 minutes later, a dark sedan pulled up smoothly to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped a woman in a crisp navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She moved with purpose, but not anger. Not yet. Her eyes found her son first, checking him over, making sure he was unharmed. Only then did she turn to the officers. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I'm Mayor Johnson, she said, showing her city ID. And this is my son. The officers nodded quickly. Ma'am, I understand you were following procedure, she interrupted gently but firmly. But I'd like to know exactly why my child was detained for standing in a public park. They explained the 911 call, the description, the concern, the standard response. She listened without interrupting. When they finished, she turned and looked toward the house across the street. The curtains were drawn now, but she knew who lived there. She'd met her at a neighborhood association meeting last fall. Then she looked back at her son, saw the tightness in his jaw, the way he held his sketchbook like a shield. She reached out and touched his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded but didn't speak. She turned back to the officers. "I'd like the name and contact information of the person who made that call." They provided it without hesitation. She thanked them, then walked with her son to the car. As they drove away, neither spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rustle of pages as he closed his sketchbook. Finally, he said, "I just wanted to draw the sunflowers." She reached over and squeezed his knee. "I know, baby. I know." And in that quiet car, rolling past manicured lawns and blooming trees, the weight of what had happened settled, not just on him, but on her. Because she wasn't just his mother. She was also the mayor of this city. And today, the line between those two roles had blurred in a way that hurt more than she expected. But for now, all she could do was drive him home, make him his favorite grilled cheese, and promise him quietly, fiercely that things would change. Not overnight, but they would change. Because no child should have to explain why they're allowed to exist in a public space. Especially not her son. Especially not in the city she was trying to make better for everyone. The drive home was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels empty. It was the kind that holds everything too big to say out loud. The boy stared out the window, watching houses blur past, each one with its neat yard, its American flag, its porch swing gently swaying in the breeze. He kept his sketchbook pressed against his chest like it could protect him from something he couldn't name. His mother drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes steady on the road, but her jaw was tight. She wasn't angry, at least not yet. She was thinking, planning, feeling that familiar mix of fury and fear that came every time her child was treated like a problem, just for being himself. When they pulled into their driveway, a modest 2-story house with a small garden of its own, where marigolds and lavender grew in tidy rows, she turned off the engine and finally spoke. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," she said softly. "But I need you to know this wasn't your fault." He nodded but didn't look at her. "I know," but she could hear the doubt in his voice. The quiet shame that creeps in when you're made to feel like you're the one who did something wrong, even when you didn't. She reached over and gently took the sketchbook from his hands, flipped it open to the page with the half-finished sunflower. The lines were careful, full of patience. She traced a finger over the pencil strokes. "This is beautiful," she said. He shrugged. "It's just a flower." "No," she said. "It's you seeing something good in the world and trying to hold on to it. That matters." He finally looked at her then, eyes a little wet but not crying. "Why do people keep doing this, Mom?" She didn't answer right away, because the truth was complicated, because she didn't want to burden him with all the ugly history behind that question. But she also knew he deserved honesty. "Some people," she said slowly, "are taught to be afraid of what they don't understand, and sometimes they're taught to be afraid of people who look like you." He swallowed. "Even when I'm not doing anything?" "Especially then," she said, "because it's not really about what you're doing. It's about what they think you might do just because of how you look." He was quiet again. "Then what are you going to do?" She took a deep breath. "I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else's child." But before she could say more, her phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was the city manager. She answered, listening as he explained that news of the incident had already started spreading. A neighbor had recorded part of the police interaction on their phone. Just a few seconds, but enough. It was already being shared in local Facebook groups. People were asking questions. Some were angry. Some were defending the caller. Others were demanding answers from City Hall. She ended the call and sat back. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the lawn. She knew what she had to do. "I need to go back," she said. He looked surprised. "Back there?" "Yes, I need to speak to the woman who called the police." He frowned. "Why, she doesn't even know me." "Exactly," she said. "And that's the problem. She saw you, made an assumption, and acted on it without knowing anything about you. That kind of fear, it doesn't just hurt you. It hurts our whole community, and if I'm going to lead this city, I can't let that go unchallenged." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "Okay." She didn't ask him to come. But after a moment, he unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'm coming with you." She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. But I want to, so they got back in the car. This time the silence felt different, less heavy, more determined. When they arrived at the street again, a small crowd had gathered near the park. Not a protest, just neighbors, some curious, some concerned. A few reporters had shown up too, cameras ready. But the woman's house, the one with the white shutters and the potted ferns on the porch, was quiet. The curtains were still drawn. The mayor didn't go to the reporters first. She walked straight to the house, her son beside her. She didn't knock loudly or demand entry. She just stood at the bottom of the porch steps and waited. After a minute, the front door opened a crack. The woman peered out, eyes wide when she saw who it was. She looked like she hadn't moved since the police left, still in her house slippers, hair a little messy, face pale. "Mayor Johnson," she stammered. I didn't expect—" "I know," the mayor said calmly. "But we need to talk." The woman glanced at the boy standing beside her, then quickly looked away. Shame colored her cheeks. She opened the door wider and stepped onto the porch, careful not to come too close. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, voice trembling. "I didn't know he was your son." "I didn't mean—" "It doesn't matter if he's my son," the mayor interrupted gently but firmly. "He's a child. He was standing in a public park, drawing flowers. That shouldn't be a reason to call the police." The woman wrung her hands. I saw him and I got nervous. There's been talk about break-ins and I thought—" "You thought wrong," the mayor said. "And your thought put my son in a situation where he had to prove he wasn't a threat just for existing. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, but you did," the mayor said, not unkindly. "Not with your hands, but with your assumptions. And those can leave marks too." The boy stood quietly watching. He wasn't angry anymore. He just felt tired. Tired of being the lesson, tired of being the example. But he also saw something in the woman's face he hadn't expected. Real regret. Not the kind that says, "I'm sorry you were offended," but the kind that says, "I'm sorry I caused harm." After a long pause, the woman whispered, "What can I do?" The mayor studied her for a moment. She could have walked away, could have held a press conference, named her, let public outrage do the rest. But that wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't change hearts. It wouldn't keep another kid from being reported for walking home from school. Instead, she said, "Start by learning. Learn why your fear landed on my son and not the white kid who walks his dog past your house every evening. Learn how bias works, even when you don't think you have any. And then, use your voice differently next time." The woman nodded, tears spilling over. "I will." The mayor turned to leave, but then stopped. "One more thing," she said. "His name is not that boy. It's not the suspicious kid. His name is important. And if you ever see him again, and you will because he lives here, you look him in the eye and say hello like you would anyone else." The woman looked at the boy then, really looked at him, not as a threat, not as a symbol, but as a person. "I'm sorry," she said directly to him. Truly, he didn't smile, but he gave a small nod. "Okay." As they walked back to the car, a reporter approached. "Mayor, can we get a statement?" She paused, then turned. "Yes," she said, "but not just for the cameras. For everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong in their own neighborhood." She spoke clearly, without anger, but with weight. "Today, my son was doing something peaceful, something beautiful. He was drawing sunflowers in a public park. And because of how he looks, someone saw that as a threat. That's not just a mistake. It's a reflection of a deeper problem in our community. And as your mayor, I'm committed to fixing it. Not with blame, but with understanding, education, and real change." She didn't mention the woman by name, didn't shame her publicly, but she made it clear, this stops now. Back at City Hall the next morning, the mayor called an emergency meeting with the police chief, the head of the 911 dispatch center, and several community leaders. She laid out what happened, not as a personal grievance, but as a case study in how bias shows up in everyday calls. "We need to review how suspicious person reports are handled," she said. "Too often they're based on gut feelings, not actual behavior. And those gut feelings are shaped by stereotypes." The police chief nodded. "We've been working on this, but clearly we've got a long way to go." "Then let's go further," she said. "Starting today, I want every officer and every dispatcher to go through updated implicit bias training. Not just a 1-hour video, real ongoing education, and I want a new protocol. If a 911 call describes someone as suspicious but doesn't report a specific crime or threat, the dispatcher must ask, What is the person actually doing? Before sending officers, there were murmurs of agreement. Some resistance too, but she held firm. Later that day, she visited the high school. She didn't go as mayor. She went as a mom. She sat with a group of students, Black, Latino, Asian, white, and just listened. They told her about being followed in stores, questioned for walking in certain neighborhoods, told to go back where they came from even though they were born here. One girl said, "It's like we have to carry permission slips just to exist." The mayor's heart ached, but she also felt something else: resolve. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with her son. He was sketching again, this time a full sunflower, bold and bright. "Do you think things will really change?" he asked without looking up. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know they won't if we don't try. And I'm not just trying for you. I'm trying for every kid who shouldn't have to explain why they're allowed to stand in a park." He smiled a little then. "Good. Because these sunflowers deserve to be seen." She reached over and ruffled his hair. "So do you." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again. But something had shifted. Not everything. Not overnight. But enough to matter. And sometimes that's where change begins, not with a shout, but with a conversation. Not with punishment, but with the courage to face what's wrong and say, "We can do better." The woman across the street would later sign up for the city's new community dialogue series. She'd sit in a circle with neighbors she'd never spoken to before. She'd listen more than she spoke. And one day, months later, she'd wave to the boy as he walked past her house, and he'd wave back. No grand speeches. No viral moment. Just two people choosing to see each other. And in a world that often feels divided, that's everything. The story didn't stay quiet for long. By Monday morning, it was everywhere. Not in the national news, not with dramatic headlines, but in the way real life spreads, through group texts, coffee shop conversations, school hallways, and neighborhood Facebook pages. Someone had posted a short clip of the police standing near the boy by the sunflowers, his sketchbook in hand. Officers asking questions while he stood perfectly still. It wasn't edited. It wasn't staged. It was just 30 seconds of a kid doing nothing wrong, and yet it felt heavy, like watching someone hold their breath underwater. At first, reactions were split. Some people defended the woman who made the call. "She was just being cautious," one comment read. "Would you want strangers hanging around your house?" Others pushed back harder. "He was drawing flowers, not breaking windows. Not yelling, just standing." But beneath the online noise, something deeper was stirring in Oak Ridge. People who'd never spoken up before started sharing their own stories. At the local grocery store, an older man waited in line behind a woman he'd seen around but never talked to. As they shuffled forward, he said quietly, "That thing with the boy in the park. It reminded me of when I was 16. Got stopped by cops just for walking home from my cousin's house. Same neighborhood. Same look." The woman nodded. "My daughter got followed in that same store last week. Clerk thought she was stealing. She was holding a coupon." In the high school cafeteria, a group of students gathered not to gossip, but to talk. One girl said, "It's like we're always on trial just for showing up." Another added, "I carry my student ID everywhere now, even to the park, just in case." They weren't angry in a loud way. They were tired. Tired of having to prove they belonged in places they'd lived their whole lives. And then there were the parents. Black parents, brown parents, immigrant parents. They met in living rooms and church basements, not to plan protests, but to share advice. "What do you tell your kids when they ask why this keeps happening?" One mother asked, voice cracking. Another replied, "I tell them the truth, that the world won't always see them fairly. But I also tell them they're worthy anyway." The mayor heard all of it, not through reports or summaries, but by showing up. She went to the community center on Tuesday evening, not in a suit, but in jeans and a sweater, carrying a tray of store-bought cookies. She didn't give a speech. She just sat in a folding chair and listened as people spoke, one after another, about being watched. Questioned, reported, or ignored simply because of how they looked. One man, a retired teacher, said, "I've lived here 32 years. Paid my taxes, coached Little League, shoveled my neighbor's driveway in winter. But last month, a new family moved in down the street, and their kid called the cops on me for checking my mailbox after dark. Said I looked like I didn't live here." He shook his head. After 32 years. The room was quiet after that, not sad, not angry, just seen. The mayor didn't offer empty promises. She didn't say, "This will never happen again," because she knew better. Instead, she said, "What if we build something that makes it harder for this to keep happening?" That's how the idea for the Community Equity Task Force began. Not in a boardroom, but in a room full of people who were tired of whispering their pain and ready to turn it into action. By Wednesday, she'd called a special city council meeting. She didn't wait for the usual monthly schedule. She knew momentum mattered. When the council members gathered in the chamber, she stood at the podium not as a politician, but as a mother who'd watched her child's dignity questioned for standing near sunflowers. "I'm not here to assign blame," she began. "I'm here to fix a system that lets fear override fairness." She laid out a three-part plan. First, mandatory implicit bias training, not just for police but for 911 dispatchers, code enforcement officers, even city librarians and park staff. Not a one-time online quiz but real workshops led by local educators and psychologists, with follow-ups and discussions. Second, a review of all suspicious person calls over the past year. Not to punish callers, but to understand patterns. Were certain neighborhoods getting more calls? Were descriptions based on behavior or just appearance? The data would be made public, so the community could see it too. Third, and this was the boldest part, she proposed a civilian response pilot program. For non-emergency calls like someone loitering or person acting strangely, instead of sending armed officers, the city would dispatch trained community responders, social workers, mental health professionals, or neighborhood ambassadors who could de-escalate, connect people to resources, or simply say, "Hey, you okay?" without turning a quiet moment into a crisis. Some council members hesitated. "It sounds expensive," one said. "And what if it doesn't work?" "Not trying is more expensive," she replied. "Every time we let bias go unchecked, we lose trust. And trust is the foundation of a safe community." In the end, the council voted unanimously to move forward, not because they all agreed perfectly, but because they'd heard the stories too. They'd seen the faces in the audience, parents holding their kids' hands, elders with tired eyes, teenagers sitting up straight like they finally mattered. But the real test came that Friday night, at the town hall meeting held in the high school auditorium. Over 300 people showed up, more than any budget meeting or zoning debate in years. The mayor stood on stage, but she didn't dominate the room. She shared the mic. First, a young woman spoke about being followed in stores since she was 12. "I started wearing my school uniform everywhere just so clerks would believe I belonged," she said. Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. "I shouldn't have to dress like a student to be treated like a person." Then a father talked about teaching his son the rules. Keep your hands visible. Don't wear hoodies at night, always carry ID. Never argue, even if you're right. "I'm teaching him how to survive," he said, "not how to be free." A white woman in the back stood up next. She wasn't from Oak Ridge originally. She'd moved here 5 years ago thinking it was safe and quiet. "I didn't realize," she said, "that safe for me meant suspicious for someone else. I never questioned why I never got followed in stores. I just assumed it was because I was polite, but maybe it was because I looked like the people who own the stores." That moment landed hard, not with guilt, but with clarity. After the speeches, small groups formed in the aisles. People exchanged phone numbers. A retired nurse offered to help design the bias training. A high school art teacher suggested students create murals about belonging for the community center walls. The woman who'd made the original call didn't speak, but she was there, sitting in the third row, listening with tears in her eyes. No one pointed at her. No one shouted. But she heard every word. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The story stopped being just about one boy and one phone call. It became a mirror. People started noticing things they'd ignored before. The way security guards watched certain shoppers more closely. The way neighborhood watch signs sometimes felt more like warnings than welcomes. The way silence from good people let small injustices grow. Local businesses got involved too. The coffee shop near the park started hosting community coffee hours, where residents could talk with city staff over free lattes. The bookstore displayed a new section, Books on Belonging, with titles by local authors and discussion guides in the back. Even the hardware store put up a sign, "Everyone is welcome here. If you feel otherwise, please tell us." The mayor made sure her son saw all of it, not to make him a symbol, but to show him that his experience had sparked something real. One afternoon, they walked past the community garden together. The sunflowers were taller now, their faces turning toward the light. "You did this," he said quietly. "No," she replied, "we did. You by being brave enough to stand there, me by refusing to stay quiet, and all these people by choosing to listen." He smiled a little. "Still think I should keep drawing them?" "Always," she said. "Because beauty reminds us what we're fighting for." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the work continued. The police department began retraining dispatchers to ask specific questions. Is the person threatening anyone? Are they damaging property? Or do they just look out of place? The difference was subtle but powerful. In the first week of the new protocol, suspicious person calls dropped by 40%. Many callers, when asked to describe actual behavior, realized they didn't have any. The mayor also met with the woman who'd made the call, not for a second time, but for a conversation that lasted 2 hours. This time they sat at her kitchen table. The woman brought out photos of her grandchildren. The mayor talked about her own childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where people looked like her son. They didn't solve racism in one afternoon, but they built a bridge, and bridges are how people cross divides. By the end of the month, the Community Equity Task Force held its first official meeting. It wasn't just city officials. It was teachers, pastors, teens, small business owners, retirees, and yes, even the woman from the porch. They didn't agree on everything, but they agreed on this. Oak Ridge could be better, and it had to start with honesty. One member suggested a simple idea. What if we just say hello more? To people who don't look like us, not in a performative way, just as neighbors. It sounded small, but sometimes small things are the biggest. Because at its heart, the problem wasn't really about sunflowers or sketchbooks or even police calls. It was about seeing each other, truly seeing each other, and choosing to believe that everyone belongs. And in Oak Ridge, that choice was finally being made, one conversation at a time. A few weeks after the town hall meeting, the woman who'd called the police sat alone in her living room, staring at a blank notebook on her coffee table. She'd bought it the day after the meeting, thinking she'd write down what she was learning, maybe even apologize properly in a letter, though she wasn't sure if it would be welcome. But so far, all she'd written was the date. The rest of the page stayed empty, like her mind kept circling the same question. How do I fix something I didn't even know I was breaking? She'd spent most of her life believing she was a good person. She recycled. She tipped well. She donated to food drives. She never used slurs or made jokes at anyone's expense. So when the mayor had looked at her that day and said, "Your fear put my son at risk," it didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like a crack in the foundation of who she thought she was. And cracks, once they appear, don't just disappear. She'd started noticing things. Small things, like how she always locked her car doors when she drove through certain parts of town, even in daylight. How she'd cross the street if a group of teenagers approached, especially if they were Black or Latino. How she'd never questioned why the suspicious calls in her neighborhood almost always described people who didn't look like her. She told herself it was just being careful, but now she wondered, careful for whom? One rainy Tuesday, she saw a flyer taped to the community bulletin board at the grocery store. It was for the first meeting of the Community Equity Task Force. "All voices welcome," it read, "especially those willing to listen." She stood there for a full minute, heart pounding like she was about to do something dangerous. Then she took a photo of the flyer with her phone. She didn't go to the first meeting, or the second, but by the third she couldn't stay away. She parked down the street so no one would see her car, walked in through the back door of the community center and sat in the very last chair, arms crossed, eyes down. She expected stares, whispers, maybe even someone asking her to leave. Instead, the mayor, calm as ever, nodded when she saw her. "Glad you're here," she said simply and moved on. The meeting wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't a blame session. It was a circle of people, teachers, retirees, shop owners, high school students talking about what safety really meant. One man said, "Safety isn't just the absence of crime. It's the presence of trust." A teenager added, "I don't feel safe when people watch me like I'm about to steal something. I feel safe when someone says good morning like they mean it." The woman listened, really listened. And for the first time, she didn't try to defend herself in her head. She just let the words land. After the meeting, she lingered near the coffee pot, unsure what to do. The mayor walked over, not with a speech but with 2 paper cups. "Decaf, okay?" she asked. The woman nodded, surprised. "You're not mad at me?" "I was," the mayor admitted, handing her a cup. "But anger doesn't build anything. Understanding does." They sat on a bench outside, rain tapping softly on the awning above them. The woman finally said what she'd been holding in. "I didn't think I was racist. I still don't think I am. But I see now that it's not just about what's in my heart. It's about what my actions do in the world." The mayor nodded. "Exactly. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. A phone call, a glance, a decision not to speak up. But it still has consequences. I didn't know how to do better," the woman said, voice breaking. "No one ever taught me." "Then let's learn together," the mayor said gently. "Not to punish the past, but to shape the future." That conversation changed everything. The woman started showing up, not just to meetings, but to the work. She signed up for the city's new bias awareness workshop, sitting in the back at first, but gradually asking questions. She read books recommended by the task force, stories by people who'd lived experiences she'd only seen on the news. She even started volunteering at the youth art program at the community center, where she met kids who reminded her of the boy from the park. Bright, thoughtful, full of quiet dreams. One afternoon, she saw him there sketching at a table near the window, her stomach twisted with nerves. She almost turned around, but then she remembered what the mayor had said. Look him in the eye. Say hello like you would anyone else. So she walked over. "Hi," she said, voice softer than she meant it to be. "I like your drawing." He looked up surprised. Then after a pause, he nodded. "Thanks," she didn't say more. Didn't apologize again. Just smiled and kept walking. But something shifted in that moment. Not because he forgave her, but because he saw her as a person trying, not just a mistake. Back at the task force, real ideas started taking shape. Someone suggested Know Your Neighbor nights, block parties where people shared food and stories, not just small talk. Another proposed a community ambassador program, trained volunteers who could respond to low-level concerns before police were called. The woman raised her hand and said, "I'd do that." No one laughed. No one questioned her. They just said, "Great, we'll train you." The training wasn't easy. It involved role-playing scenarios, learning de-escalation techniques, and, hardest of all, examining her own assumptions. In one exercise, she was asked to describe a suspicious person. She started to say someone hanging around with no purpose, but then stopped herself. "Wait," she said. "That's how I described him. But he had a purpose. He was drawing." The room was quiet. Not judgmental, just aware. She began to understand that change wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming aware and then acting on that awareness. Meanwhile, the mayor kept her promise. She didn't let the story fade. She used her platform to keep the conversation alive. At a city council meeting, she shared anonymous quotes from residents. "I carry my library card like it's a shield. I tell my son to smile more so people won't be scared of him. I moved here for safety, but my kids don't feel safe just walking to school." She didn't shame. She illuminated, and slowly the culture began to shift. The local newspaper started a monthly column called Voices of Oak Ridge, featuring stories from people of all backgrounds. The high school added a unit on community history. Not just the founding families, but the families who'd been here quietly, building lives despite being overlooked. Even the police department began inviting community members to ride along, not to monitor but to understand. The woman found herself doing things she never imagined. She knocked on doors in parts of town she used to avoid, handing out flyers for the ambassador program. She sat with an elderly Vietnamese man who spoke little English and helped him fill out a form to report a broken streetlight, something he'd been too nervous to do alone. She learned his name was Mr. Lin, and that he grew the best bok choy in his backyard. One evening, she came home and cried, not from guilt, but from something like relief. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than her own comfort. The mayor noticed the change too, not in grand gestures but in small ones. The woman started speaking up in meetings, not to defend herself but to ask, "How might this affect someone who doesn't look like me?" She volunteered to co-lead a workshop for other residents who, like her, were just beginning to see their blind spots. "You're doing good work," the mayor told her one day. "I'm just trying to make up for—" "No," the mayor interrupted gently. "Don't frame it as making up. Frame it as moving forward. That's what matters." The boy, meanwhile, kept drawing. His sunflowers appeared on posters for the new community events. He even taught a Saturday workshop for younger kids, how to see the world like an artist. The woman signed up to help, not as a savior but as a helper, passing out pencils, cleaning up eraser shavings, smiling when a 6-year-old proudly showed her a lopsided daisy. At the end of one session, the boy walked over to her. "You're good with the little ones," he said. She blinked, surprised. "Thanks." He hesitated, then added, "My mom says you're trying." "I am," she said honestly. "Every day." He nodded like that was enough. And maybe it was, because real change isn't about dramatic apologies or viral moments. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about listening when you'd rather explain. It's about seeing someone not as a symbol of your mistake, but as a person deserving of space, respect, and sunflowers. By summer's end, the Community Ambassador Program launched with 12 volunteers, half of them people who'd once held biases they were now working to unlearn. They wore bright yellow vests, not uniforms, and carried radios connected to a non-emergency line. Their first call? A neighbor worried about a teen sitting on a bench late at night. The ambassador arrived, offered the teen a bottle of water, asked if he was okay. Turned out he was waiting for his mom to finish her shift at the hospital. No police, no drama, just human connection. The woman took that call, and when she got home that night, she finally filled more than just the date in her notebook. She wrote, "Today I didn't see a problem. I saw a person." And in Oak Ridge, that was becoming the new normal. Not perfect, not finished, but real. Because healing doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in kitchens, on porches, in community centers, and in the quiet courage of people choosing to do better, one honest conversation at a time. 6 months after the day everything changed, Oak Ridge didn't look wildly different from the outside. The same tidy lawn stretched down quiet streets. The same golden retriever still chased squirrels near the park. But if you walked through the neighborhood with your ears open and your heart willing to listen, you could feel it, the shift in the air, like the moment just after rain when everything smells cleaner, lighter. It was a Saturday again, warm and bright, the kind of day that invites people outside. And today, more than usual, the streets were alive. Families set up folding chairs on sidewalks. Kids balanced on scooters with no helmets, laughing as they weaved between parked cars. A few neighbors strung up fairy lights between trees, not for a holiday, but just because. Today was the official launch of the Neighborhood Ambassador Program, the city's first real step toward redefining what safety could mean. At the center of it all stood the community garden, now bursting with color. The sunflowers were taller than ever, their golden faces turned toward the sky like they were watching over everything. And near them, on a small wooden stage built just for the occasion, a 16-year-old boy stood holding a microphone. He wasn't nervous this time. Not like that day months ago when police lights had flickered nearby. Today, the only lights were the sun and the string bulbs above, and the only eyes on him were friendly ones. He cleared his throat, glanced at the crowd, maybe 100 people, maybe more, and held up his sketchbook. "I draw sunflowers," he said, voice steady, "because they don't ask for permission to exist. They just grow. They face the light, even when the world tries to shade them." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Some people smiled. Others wiped their eyes. He flipped open the sketchbook to a fresh page and held it up so everyone could see. A detailed drawing of the garden, the sunflowers, the path, and in the corner, small but clear, a figure sitting on a bench sketching. It was him, but it was also anyone who'd ever felt watched for simply being. "This," he said, "is what belonging looks like." Then he stepped back, and the mayor walked onto the stage. She wasn't in a suit this time, just slacks and a soft blue blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but not worn down, more like someone who'd carried a heavy thing for a while and was finally seeing it turn into something useful. She didn't give a long speech. She just said, "Today isn't about fixing one mistake. It's about building something better together. And it starts with how we see each other." Then she introduced the first group of neighborhood ambassadors, 12 volunteers from all walks of life. There was a retired teacher, A barista from the corner cafe, a high school senior, a mechanic, a grandmother who'd lived on the same block for 40 years. And yes, the woman who'd once called the police on a boy drawing flowers. She stood among them in a bright yellow vest, hands clasped in front of her, not hiding, not apologizing, just present. When the mayor called her name, the crowd didn't boo. They didn't cheer wildly either. They just nodded, because by now everyone knew her story, not as gossip, but as part of the lesson. She'd shown up. She'd listened. She'd changed. And in a town trying to heal, that counted for something. After the ceremony, people milled about, eating lemon bars, sipping iced tea from paper cups, chatting in clusters that didn't always follow old lines of race or age or zip code. The woman found herself talking to Mr. Lin, the elderly man from down the street who handed her a small bag of homegrown bok choy. "For your soup," he said with a smile. She accepted it like it was a gift, which it was. Near the garden fence, the boy sat on a bench sketching again. A little girl, maybe 7 with pigtails and grass-stained knees, hovered nearby, too shy to approach. After a minute, he looked up and patted the space beside him. "You want to try?" She nodded eagerly and sat down. He handed her a pencil and a fresh sheet of paper. "Start with the shape of the petals," he said gently. "Don't worry if it's perfect. Just see what's there." Across the park, the mayor watched them. Her chest felt full, not with pride exactly, but with something quieter, deeper. Hope, maybe. Not the flashy kind that promises everything will be fixed overnight, but the steady kind that says, we're moving in the right direction. She knew the work wasn't done. Bias didn't vanish because one program launched. Fear didn't disappear because one woman changed her mind. But systems could shift, hearts could open, and communities could choose every single day to be more like the sunflowers, facing the light even when it felt hard. Later that afternoon, as the event wound down, the woman approached the mayor. She didn't say much, just handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note. It read, "Thank you for giving me a chance to do better. I'll keep showing up." The mayor folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. "You already are," she said. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, the boy walked home, this time with the little girl and her mom, who lived just 2 blocks away. They talked about art, about school, about the weird cloud that looked like a dragon. Normal things. Easy things. When he got home, he found his mom on the back porch sipping tea. He sat beside her, sketchbook in hand. Today felt different, he said. "How so?" "I didn't feel like I had to prove I belonged," he said. "I just did." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's the goal." They sat in silence for a while, listening to crickets and distant laughter from a backyard barbecue. The kind of sounds that mean a neighborhood is alive, not just quiet. Inside the house, on the kitchen counter, sat a small vase with a single sunflower, picked that morning from the garden. It wasn't perfect. One petal was slightly bent, but it was bright. It was real. And it was enough. In the weeks that followed, the ambassador program handled its first real calls. A neighbor worried about a man sleeping on a bench. Turned out he was waiting for the bus after a late shift. An elderly woman called about loud music from a teen's headphones. Ambassador showed up, smiled, and gently reminded him to lower the volume. No sirens, no suspicion, just human-to-human contact. People started using the non-emergency line more. Not to report suspicious people, but to ask for help. "Can someone check on Mrs. Jenkins? Her lights haven't been on in 2 days. There's a lost dog near Maple Street." The city began to feel less like a place policed by fear, and more like a place cared for by neighbors. The woman became one of the most trusted ambassadors, not because she was perfect, but because she listened. She remembered birthdays. She brought soup to sick neighbors. She learned to say good morning in 3 different languages because she wanted the people on her block to feel seen. And the boy? He kept drawing. His sketches started appearing in the local library, then in the city newsletter. He even submitted one to a statewide youth art contest and won. The piece was called Still Here, and it showed a sunflower growing through a crack in concrete. At the awards ceremony, the mayor sat in the front row. She didn't clap the loudest. She just watched her son stand tall, accept his ribbon, and say quietly into the mic, "This is for everyone who's been told they don't belong. You do." Back in Oak Ridge, life went on. Kids rode bikes. Lawns got mowed. Mail got delivered. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. People looked at each other longer, said hello more, asked questions before making assumptions. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still hard days, still moments when old fears crept in. But now there was also a path forward, a shared understanding that safety wasn't about control but about connection.